Welcome, gentle listener, to another quiet journey through the echoes of history. Tonight, we drift into a sea of what-ifs, a place where history bends just slightly and imagination fills the gaps. Close your eyes if you wish, and picture the calm waters of Pearl Harbor before dawn. But something is different. Beneath the waves, a silent hunter from another century stirs. A modern submarine, sleek and powerful, far beyond its time. What would happen if the future met the past in those fateful waters of 1941? As we unravel this gentle yet extraordinary tale, let the hum of engines and the whisper of tides carry you toward rest. And if these quiet voyages through time bring you peace, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more calm nights of history waiting ahead. The morning air at Pearl Harbor carried the same scent it always did: salt, oil, and sun-warmed metal. It was a smell that seeped into uniforms, lingered in the mess halls, and clung to the railings of the battleships anchored in that vast, lazy crescent of the Hawaiian coast. In early December of 1941, the men of the US Pacific Fleet lived by a rhythm that seemed unshakable, a pattern of drills, maintenance, and waiting. Always waiting. The war in Europe felt far away. The Pacific, though tense, seemed stable. Even the newspapers at the dockside stands spoke more about rationing and distant speeches than about war. And so, life continued, quietly and predictably. At dawn, the harbour was peaceful, a wide mirror of blue interrupted by grey hulls and the glint of brass. The Arizona, Oklahoma, Nevada, and California lay at anchor like sleeping giants, each attended by small boats, fussing with supplies and letters. Sailors moved slowly across the decks, their white uniforms bright against the dark metal. The soundscape was gentle. The distant rhythm of a bugle, the low murmur of engines from the harbour tugboats, and the lazy slap of water against hulls. Farther inland, the base stirred with its own routines. The buzz of radios, the hiss of breakfast griddles, the shuffle of boots on wooden floors. It was Sunday, and most men expected a quiet morning, a half-day of duty, followed by liberty ashore. You can almost imagine it. Walking along the quay, the sun already warm, the smell of coffee drifting from the mess. You'd hear laughter, idle talk, and the occasional clatter of a wrench dropped from a catwalk. Nothing urgent, nothing fearful. The officers, wives on the nearby naval housing lawns, were watering hibiscus or hanging laundry in the soft wind. Children played near the picket fences, their voices faintly echoing across the bay. There was comfort in the dullness of it all, the kind of routine that makes one believe history is holding still. Beneath the surface, though, things were changing, though no one on that bright morning could sense it. There were small signals in the flow of paperwork and intelligence reports, messages intercepted, radio transmissions noted and filed away for later. The Navy's watch officers at the signal station had logged a few irregularities, but nothing alarming. Probably weather interference, one of them muttered as he rubbed his eyes after a long night shift. Life at the harbour that week was a study in maintenance. Every ship had its schedules. Lubricate this valve, test that compressor, log boiler pressure, recalibrate rangefinders. The men on the destroyers were checking depth charges and torpedo tubes, the same torpedoes that at this stage were still prone to malfunction and misfire. They were old weapons and they required constant care. For many sailors, these were the boring details of survival. They joked about how much oil a battleship could leak without sinking, or how the paint never seemed dry before orders came to repaint again. The reality was slow, sweaty, and unglamorous. Wiping condensation from brass, tightening bolts, running drills they'd run 100 times before. At the Naval Air Station across the bay, ground crews were inspecting PBY Catalina patrol planes. The smell of aviation fuel was sharp in the morning sun. The men wore khaki caps pulled low against the glare. They ran their fingers along aluminum fuselages, checked propellers, tested radios. It was methodical work. Not exciting, but necessary. There was a comfort in repetition. For those stationed at Pearl, the days blurred together. Bright mornings, long afternoons, and evenings spent at the canteen or walking the beaches. There were dances in the town of Honolulu, cold Coca-Cola bottles lined up on bar counters, and the distant strum of ukuleles from open windows. The officers wrote letters home, often about nothing in particular. "The sea is calm these days," one lieutenant wrote to his wife in Illinois. "The work is dull, but that's better than excitement. We hear rumors, but who knows what's true. I'd rather just fix the engines and wait for leave." Such letters filled the mailbags that came and went on small postal boats each morning. Routine correspondence, updates about pay, family, and weather. Ordinary words that would later become relics. The harbour itself was not silent, even at night. It breathed in its own way, cranes turning, pumps humming, waves lapping against the stone walls. Oil slicks shimmered on the surface, catching the reflection of floodlights. The air was heavy with the smell of diesel. The ship's crews worked in shifts, so even in the dead of night, there were footsteps, voices, and laughter in the distance. The Navy at the time was still adjusting to the idea of air power. Battleships were the pride of the fleet, towering, armoured, and symbolic. Pilots, though respected, were still seen by many as peripheral. "Ships win wars," one officer said confidently over coffee that morning. "Planes just scout." It was a sentiment that would not survive the day that followed. In the officers' club, conversation drifted toward rumours of negotiations with Japan. Few took them seriously. "We've been at the table for months," said another. "It'll work itself out." The idea of a surprise attack was too dramatic, too unlikely. War, to those men, was a thing that started with announcements, not silence. Outside, the tropical wind carried the smell of the ocean and the faint, far sound of Hawaiian music from a radio somewhere down the street. The sky was a gentle wash of pink and gold as the sun rose over the Kula Mountains. On the decks of the ships, sailors leaned against railings, sipping coffee from tin mugs, watching the day begin. And yet, something in the air was different, perhaps only noticeable in hindsight. There was a faint tension, a sense of waiting. The week before, radar operators had received orders to begin new training sessions. Intelligence officers had passed around a memo about unusual Japanese radio silence. In the moment, though, it meant little. The harbour remained calm. Routine prevailed. The harbour patrol logged its morning entries, or 600, conditions clear, visibility good, no activity. In the Navy Yard workshops, machinists prepared to start their day, sharpening tools, wiping down benches, and checking the inventory of spare parts. The mechanics knew the ships almost like living things, where they groaned, where they leaked, which valves stuck in humid weather. Down in the submarine base at the southern end of the harbour, diesel submarines of the Porpoise and Tambo classes sat moored side by side. They were small, cramped, and oily. Inside, the air smelled of machinery and metal polish. Crews went through their maintenance lists, oblivious to the fact that in another timeline, one we have yet to imagine, a different kind of submarine was listening silently beneath these same waters. That modern vessel, silent, nuclear-powered, bristling with sensors, does not belong here yet, but it waits, in the space between imagination and memory, deep below the waves. Its existence is a question we will slowly uncover, not as a story of fantasy, but as a reflection on what history means when time bends. For now, though, all is still. A young sailor aboard the West Virginia cleans the brass on the bridge railing. Another takes a photograph with a borrowed camera, a picture of smiling faces and calm seas. The photo will survive, though he will not. In the nearby town, the streets are waking. The sound of car engines, market chatter, the smell of bread from the bakery. It's a Sunday like any other, the kind that slips quietly into memory. Across the Pacific, however, ships are already moving, their engines turning steadily, their decks packed with planes. But here in Pearl Harbor, no one knows, no one suspects. A faint vibration passes through the water. imperceptible, yet real. Perhaps it is only a passing current, or perhaps it is something older, deeper, echoing forward from what's about to begin. The harbour remains bright and peaceful, its surface undisturbed. The sailors go about their duties. The typewriters clatter in the headquarters office. The pigeons flutter on the roofs. History breathes in, quietly. And for a few more moments, the world holds its breath with it. Beneath the calm, sunlit waters of Pearl Harbor, the sea deepens quickly. A steep, dark descent into a cold stillness that has changed little across centuries. Down here, the light fades into a slow blue haze. Sound travels differently, bending and echoing through layers of pressure. It's a world of silence, of unseen movement. Now imagine, not as fantasy, but as a quiet thought experiment, that within this same dark expanse rests a vessel that does not belong to 1941. Sleek, black and alive with technology that no one above could comprehend. A modern nuclear submarine, the product of decades of human ingenuity and fear, waiting silently in a time that has not yet earned its existence. It is not a thing of drama, but of precision, a moving factory of physics and patience. Its outer hull is smooth, coated with sonar-absorbent tiles that break apart sound waves. The steel curves gently, designed not for beauty but for invisibility. No flags, no markings. Only the faint white numerals stenciled near the sail, meaningless to anyone who might see them here. Inside, there is no roar of engines, no smell of diesel, no smoke. The power comes from a small, contained sun, a nuclear reactor no larger than a family car, sealed behind layers of shielding. It hums with the quiet steadiness of inevitability. From this heart flows endless energy, heat converted to steam, steam driving turbines, turbines turning electric generators. Everything efficient, everything controlled. To the men of 1941, this would have seemed impossible. A vessel that could remain submerged for months, not days. A ship that never needed to surface, never needed air, never burned a drop of fuel. But here it is in this thought experiment, existing outside of their understanding, waiting in the still water where history and imagination meet. Let's walk slowly through it, or rather float, room by room. The control room is the brain of the vessel, dimly lit, always cool. There are no windows, only screens and displays, their light low to preserve night vision. Modern sonar paints the ocean in ghostly outlines. The seafloor, the hulls of ships above, the faint shimmer of thermoclines. Every sound, from the scrape of an anchor to the distant pulse of a whale, is mapped in 3 dimensions. In 1941, sonar was crude, a single direction ping, followed by a nervous silence as operators listened for the faintest echo. Here, it's symphonic. The submarine sees the sea not with eyes, but with ears stretched across miles. It can hear the propeller signature of every vessel in Pearl Harbor, can identify a ship by the number of its blades, the rhythm of its rotation, the shape of its hull vibrations. Each sound is a fingerprint, and this submarine knows them all. To your left, in the weapons control center, lies the machinery of its purpose. Modern torpedoes rest quietly in their tubes, long, slender, and capable of decisions. Unlike the unguided compressed air weapons of 1941, these are thinking machines. Each one carries sonar, guidance systems, and logic circuits capable of hunting a moving target. They can turn, adjust, wait. They do not miss easily. A few steps further aft, the navigation systems hum softly. In this age, satellites guide every movement, but here, beneath the Pacific of 1941, they cannot. The submarine must rely on inertial navigation, gyroscopes and accelerometers tracking every motion since its last known position. It's precise enough to circle the world unseen. In the crew quarters, the atmosphere is calm, measured. There are no hammocks or open bunks like in 1941's diesel subs. Each crew member has a small compartment, Narrow, efficient, private. The air smells faintly of recycled oxygen and machine oil. Every breath is reclaimed, purified by chemical scrubbers and carbon filters. Water is distilled from heat exchange systems, food reheated from sealed pouches, and coffee brewed from powder that never goes stale. There is no sunlight, no wind, no horizon. Life here runs on quiet discipline and trust in technology. Each shift moves with the precision of a clock, 6 hours on, 12 off. The crew learns to sleep through noise and wake without sunrise. Back in 1941, submariners lived very differently. They worked inside hot, diesel-scented tubes, where temperatures could reach 40 degrees Celsius. The air grew foul, the humidity oppressive. Condensation dripped from every surface. Food spoiled. Fresh water was rationed. And yet, those men endured, because that was what service required. Here, in this modern submarine, everything is designed to remove discomfort. Yet the isolation is deeper. You might feel that paradox: greater comfort, but greater distance from the world above. The commanding officer's station sits at the center of the control room, surrounded by touchscreens and silent data feeds. A man, or woman in this time, commands through quiet gestures, issuing orders in calm tones. Every sound carries weight. Every silence means readiness. The vessel is a study in restraint. Even the smallest motion is deliberate. To rise or fall through the water, the submarine adjusts its buoyancy by pumping seawater in or out of ballast tanks. A gentle, almost imperceptible movement. The planes tilt, the pressure shifts, and the ship glides like a shadow through liquid darkness. The crew rarely speaks above a whisper. The hum of the reactor, the soft beeping of sonar, and the rhythmic click of keyboards form a kind of lullaby. It's easy to forget that this calm hides unimaginable power. Consider this. One of its torpedoes could destroy a battleship in seconds. Its cruise missiles could strike from hundreds of miles away with unerring precision. It could surface unseen, strike, and vanish beneath the waves before radar even noticed. Against the world of 1941, a world of slow transmissions, visual signals, and hand-drawn maps, it would be like a god beneath the sea. But this is not a story about gods. It is a story about the quiet weight of knowledge. Because every instrument, every glowing screen in this submarine represents the accumulation of decades, millions of hours of study, failure, and refinement. Each piece of metal was shaped by lessons learned in wars that hadn't yet happened in 1941. Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War. Each screw and circuit carries the memory of human progress and the shadows of mistakes made long ago. If the sailors above could see it, they would not understand what they were looking at. They might think it was alien. But it is nothing more than the logical continuation of their own work. Their grease-stained hands, their careful logs, their endless drills. They were building the first steps toward this very machine. Even its silence is their legacy. In the reactor compartment, deep within the submarine's core, lies the reason it can exist at all. The nuclear heart beats not with flame, but with fission. Atoms splitting apart, releasing heat that drives everything else. It's both miraculous and mundane. Engineers monitor it not with awe, but with routine. To them, it's just numbers on a screen. If you listen closely, though, beneath the machinery's hum, you can almost hear the pulse of something timeless. A steady rhythm that connects the human desire to understand, to control, to endure. The same impulse that led sailors in 1941 to tighten bolts and check valves now sustains this ship's quiet perfection. The submarine drifts forward, unseen. Above, the surface world of Pearl Harbor remains unaware, full of noise and sunlight and ordinary life. Down here, time feels slower, stretched. The past and future seem less distinct. In this stillness, a strange question emerges. What is progress, really? Is it just the accumulation of better tools, or is it the same human persistence expressed through different means? The crew here might think of themselves as modern, advanced, but their work is no less monotonous, no less demanding. than the sailors of 1941. The difference lies in what they can see. Their screens show the world in perfect clarity. Every ship, every current, every echo. Yet that clarity brings its own burden, because now, in this imagined moment, they are seeing 1941 as it truly was, a world on the edge of catastrophe. Above them, the harbour glows faintly on sonar, the static silhouettes of ships anchored and unmoving. The patterns of engines and propellers are familiar to history, yet ghost-like in the present. The submarine listens, it records, it waits. Somewhere in its silent corridors, a crewman writes in the ship's digital log, "Contact with multiple surface vessels, stationary, no transmissions detected, conditions stable." His words are as calm and routine as any sailor's. And yet, unknowingly, he has described the calm before one of history's most violent hours. The modern submarine floats in the deep, sustained by technology that 1941 could not imagine, yet haunted by events that 1941 could not avoid. The hum of the reactor continues. The sonar sweeps again. Above, the light of dawn filters faintly through the waves, and as the submarine maintains its silent watch, another thought surfaces, soft and unsettling. If such a vessel had truly been there in those waters on that morning, what might it have done? The Pacific, in the weeks before the attack, was an expanse of quiet tension. It stretched from the coast of California to the shores of Japan, vast, indifferent, and deceptively calm. But beneath its rolling blue surface, ships were already moving, courses plotted in secrecy, orders sealed with wax and silence. If you stood on the deck of a freighter in late November 1941, you might have seen only endless water and sky. But scattered across that horizon were the faint outlines of fate. Steel hulls cutting through the swell, smoke curling upward from funnels, and crews who did not yet know what their voyage would mean for the world. The war had not officially reached the Pacific, not yet. But the signs were there. Coded messages, fuel stockpiles quietly increasing, diplomats meeting behind closed doors. Newspapers in Honolulu spoke more about football scores than foreign policy, but deep within naval intelligence offices in Washington and Tokyo, something was stirring. The Americans called it war talk. The Japanese called it the Southern Operation. History would call it inevitable. Meanwhile, somewhere beneath those same Pacific waters, a vessel from another age drifted in silence. The modern submarine, out of place, out of time, continued its quiet vigil, its sensors reaching across the ocean like unseen fingers. On its sonar screens, the Pacific was alive with movement. Faint signatures of ships, far to the west, moving in formation. At first, it might have seemed like nothing unusual. Convoys moved constantly between the Japanese home islands and their colonies. But these contacts were different. Their routes curved eastward, their speeds measured, deliberate. Each vessel moved with precision, as though guided by a single plan. The submarine's sonar operators listened carefully. Each ship had its own sound, its own mechanical rhythm. To modern ears, these signatures were unmistakable. The engine thrum of Akagi, the aircraft carrier, the sharp propeller bite of Kaga, the heavy, low-frequency pulse of battleships Hiei and Kirishima. The computer identified them instantly, but in this time, no one else could have known. To the Americans of 1941, these ships were ghosts beyond the horizon. The Pacific was too vast to monitor, and the technology too limited to perceive what was already underway. On the submarine's bridge, the commanding officer stared at the digital map. Dozens of red icons glowed faintly, an entire fleet crossing the North Pacific under radio silence. "We're watching history assemble itself," he murmured quietly. No one answered. There was nothing to say. Above the waves, in Tokyo, final preparations were underway. Orders had been transmitted using diplomatic codes, disguised within seemingly routine communications. Each carrier in the task force had received the same instruction: maintain strict radio silence and proceed to position north of Oahu by December 7th. The men aboard those ships were told little. Many believed they were heading for training exercises. Some suspected otherwise. They scrubbed decks, polished brass, wrote letters home. One Japanese pilot wrote to his brother, "If we succeed, it will be over quickly. If we fail, I hope you will remember me kindly." The Pacific winds carried those unspoken thoughts eastward, invisible and unstoppable. In Honolulu, the same winds stirred palm trees along the waterfront. The days remained bright and warm, and the routine of base life continued without interruption. At Hickam Field, flight crews prepared training aircraft for another uneventful Sunday. Mechanics joked as they cleaned spark plugs. Somewhere on Ford Island, a sailor practiced his trumpet, the sound floating lazily across the water. The difference between calm and catastrophe was now measured in days. Far to the north, the Japanese fleet cut through icy seas. Its decks rimed with frost. Crews worked in thick gloves and scarves, their breath fogging in the cold. The carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, carried more than 400 aircraft, fighters, bombers, torpedo planes, each meticulously prepared. On their decks, maintenance crews checked fuel lines and bomb racks, testing the limits of endurance. Every action was deliberate, every movement rehearsed. The fleet's commander, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, paced his narrow bridge, chain-smoking and rereading the operation orders. He was not the architect of this plan. That credit belonged to Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, but he was its executor. Yamamoto had warned that Japan could not win a long war against the United States, but perhaps, he believed, a sudden blow could cripple American resolve before war truly began. The modern submarine, floating unseen beneath them, watched it all unfold in eerie detachment. It could have surfaced, could have sent a transmission that would have changed everything. But it didn't. Its orders, or perhaps its sense of restraint, kept it silent. Instead, it recorded. Inside its data systems, every movement of the fleet was logged in perfect detail. Bearing, course, speed. Information that, if shared, would have rewritten the next century. Yet in this moment, those details existed only in the quiet hum of the submarine's processors. The Pacific rolled on, indifferent. As the Japanese fleet advanced, the weather shifted in their favor. Heavy clouds veiled them from sight, and cold winds masked the faint signatures of their engines. Nature itself seemed complicit in their secrecy. In Washington, American intelligence analysts puzzled over broken fragments of intercepted messages. They had decoded portions of Japan's diplomatic traffic, but the meaning was unclear. Words like "climb Mount Nitaka," a poetic phrase meaning proceed with the operation, passed through hands without recognition. The warnings were there, buried in plain sight, but bureaucracy moved slower than the tide. And so, the Pacific remained silent. On December 2nd, 5 days before the attack, Nagumo's fleet reached its rendezvous point. The ships formed a loose circle as crews prepared for final briefings. In the dark, under red lights, officers unfolded maps of Hawaii. They marked the locations of American ships, based on intelligence gathered months before. Every detail had been studied: the depth of the harbor, the tides, the expected positions of battleships at anchor. The irony, unseen by them, was that a submarine from the future now observed their every move with microscopic accuracy. It could see what they could not. The convergence of two eras, one blind and determined, the other all-seeing but paralyzed by knowledge. You might wonder what the crew of the modern submarine felt as they watched. Awe, perhaps, or guilt. Maybe something quieter, a recognition of inevitability. History, once written, resists interference. To change it would be to unmake everything that followed. On the evening of December 5th, as the fleet turned south toward Hawaii, the sea grew calm again. The engines droned steadily, and the sound of distant waves echoed faintly against the hulls. Sailors on deck looked up at the northern stars. For a brief moment, the Pacific seemed peaceful once more. Below them, the The submarine's sensors traced every sound, the rhythmic churn of propellers, the faint hiss of waves against steel. Its computers mapped the fleet's trajectory with absolute precision. The commanding officer watched the data scroll across the display. "It's like hearing the heartbeat of history," someone whispered. The submarine moved parallel to the formation, far below, maintaining silence. Above, the carriers ploughed forward into darkness. The distance between them was more than water. It was the entire span of human time. By December 6th, the fleet was within striking range. The air crews reviewed their target photographs once more. Hangars, airfields, battleships. They wrote letters and sealed them in envelopes marked, "To be delivered if I do not return." On the submarine, the crew reviewed data logs, temperature gradients, salinity levels, engine signatures. To them, it was all information. But beneath those calm details lay the truth of what was about to happen. Thousands of lives about to change, millions of futures about to unfold differently. At midnight, the Japanese fleet turned east, final approach. The Pacific wind was cold, but the stars were clear. The carriers began turning into the wind, ready to launch at dawn. Below, the submarine adjusted depth slightly. 400 feet, silent and invisible. Its sonar screens lit up with the hum of readiness above. The crew listened. The commander stood still, his hand resting on the railing. In another world, they might have intervened, but in this one, they remained watchers, custodians of knowledge, not actors in the scene. At 6 a.m., the first Japanese planes began to roll down the flight decks. The sound of their engines rumbled faintly through the water, reaching the submarine as a low, steady vibration. The crew listened as history crossed the threshold from possibility to reality. And as the sound faded into distance, replaced by the rhythmic churn of the next wave of planes, a quiet thought passed through the command deck, one that would linger for the rest of their voyage. If they could hear it all happening before anyone above knew, could they really remain silent? Dawn began softly over Oahu, the kind of quiet morning that felt eternal. A thin mist rose from the harbour, curling lazily around the anchored battleships. The air was still, heavy with salt, and the faint scent of oil drifting across the water. On shore, palm fronds whispered faintly in the early breeze. It was a Sunday, the kind that began with coffee, half-buttoned uniforms, and the slow rhythm of a day off. At the mess hall, sailors laughed over pancakes and bacon. A few men strolled the decks, cigarettes glowing faintly in the grey light. On Ford Island, a bugle sounded, distant and almost lonely. The Pacific rolled gently against the hulls of the Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, Nevada, Tennessee, and Maryland. Their decks were quiet, their crews unworried. It was 7:48 a.m. Beneath that same calm sea, a modern submarine hovered in the dark. Its crew stared at the sonar screens, where faint signals shimmered, dozens of moving points to the north. They were listening to the beginning. The first wave of Japanese aircraft had already left the decks of their carriers hours ago. 183 planes, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, fighters. They flew low over the ocean, skimming the surface to avoid radar. Their formation was perfect, their silence absolute. Inside the submarine, the sound came first, a distant, rhythmic pulse of engines. Modern sensors painted the invisible sky above with dots of light, each marking a plane. They moved in formation, like a swarm of steel insects. The commander leaned closer. "They're coming in low," he murmured, "just under the radar line." No one spoke. The screens told the story better than words could. The submarine's computers cross-referenced every signal, calculating flight paths, altitude, and speed. The data matched perfectly with known strike formations. The crew knew what that meant. They were watching the first moments of one of the most infamous attacks in human history, not as readers of books or viewers of documentaries, but as witnesses beneath the waves. Above them, the Japanese formation split in two. One group veered toward the airfields, Hickam, Wheeler, Iwo. The other turned toward the harbour. In the quiet before impact, Pearl Harbor remained unaware. A few radar operators on Oahu noticed the incoming blips, but assumed they were a flight of American B-17s expected from the mainland. The confusion lasted just long enough for the planes to close the distance. The submarine's sonar detected the faint hiss of wind resistance, the sound of aircraft descending. And then, from above, the first explosion broke the silence. It came like a thunderclap, a deep, shuddering sound that rolled through the water and echoed off the submarine's hull. Seconds later, another, and another. The command deck vibrated faintly with the shock waves. The sonar screens flashed irregular bursts, the echoes of bombs hitting water, metal, and earth. The commander closed his eyes. "That's Battleship Row," he said quietly. On the surface, chaos bloomed like fire in the dawn. The first torpedo struck the USS Oklahoma, tearing a hole below the waterline. Within minutes, she began to list, rolling heavily to one side. Sailors scrambled to escape as alarms screamed across the decks. The USS West Virginia was hit next, then the California. Torpedoes sliced through the harbour, their wakes white and straight. Overhead, dive bombers screamed downward, the rising sun insignia flashing briefly in the morning light before disappearing into smoke and flame. The USS Arizona took a single catastrophic hit, a bomb that penetrated her forward magazine. For an instant, there was only a blinding flash. Then came the roar. The ship erupted in an explosion so vast that it shook the island itself. Fire and steel rose skyward, raining debris across the harbour. From below, the submarine's instruments flared with violent noise. Pressure sensors spiked. The sea convulsed with shockwaves that rolled outward for miles. "God," someone whispered. "We're hearing it happen in real time." The commander said nothing. His hands were steady on the console, though his eyes betrayed something deeper. Sorrow, perhaps, or disbelief. "Record everything," he ordered quietly. "Every sound, every impact." The computer complied, capturing it all. The thunder of detonations, the cries of straining metal, the muted echoes of chaos translated into data. Above, the morning sky turned black with smoke. Flames leapt from the harbour, reflecting off the water like molten glass. The smell of burning oil drifted across Honolulu. Men ran through corridors thick with smoke, carrying the wounded, shouting names that vanished in the roar of explosions. The second wave of Japanese planes arrived at 8:55. They dove in with precision, targeting the airfields and surviving ships. Anti-aircraft fire erupted, tracers streaking through the sky in bright, desperate arcs. From beneath, it all sounded like the heartbeat of destruction, muffled but unrelenting. The submarine's hydrophones translated the violence into a symphony of low, rolling thunder. "Look at that," a sonar technician murmured, eyes wide. "They're fighting back." Indeed, above the smoke and flame, a handful of American gunners had reached their stations. Some fired from the decks of half-sinking ships, others from shore batteries. They hit a few attackers, sending them spiraling into the water. But the imbalance was too great. The Arizona burned fiercely, her hull shattered. The Oklahoma rolled completely over. The California and West Virginia settled slowly into the mud. In less than 2 hours, more than 2,000 Americans were dead. Inside the submarine, the crew sat in silence. They could do nothing. They were observers of history, condemned to watch without interfering. One of the younger technicians broke the silence. "If we surfaced now," he said softly. "If we radioed them." The commander cut him off with a look. "We can't." The young man stared down at his hands. "But we could stop it." The commander's voice was calm, but hollow. "No, we'd only destroy what follows." No one spoke after that. The submarine drifted deeper, away from the sounds of battle, until the noise above softened into a distant hum. For hours, they listened. At 10 a.m., The last Japanese planes turned north, leaving behind a harbor of flame and ruin. Smoke still rose in thick black columns, visible for miles. Rescue boats moved through the wreckage, pulling survivors from the water. The sound of gunfire faded, replaced by shouting and the crackle of burning oil. The Pacific was strangely still again. The commander stood before the main display, where red dots, the retreating Japanese formation, blinked faintly on the edge of the screen. "It's over," someone whispered. The commander shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "It's just begun." He turned to his crew, eyes heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. "Mark the time," he said. "December 7th, 1941. The world just changed." And in the silent depths beneath the Pacific, the modern submarine began to move once more. Not toward the past it could alter, but toward the history it could only watch unfold. The harbor was still burning when the submarine began its slow circuit beneath the wreckage. From the depths, the water carried strange harmonies. The faint hiss of fires above, the groaning of twisted metal, the steady fall of debris sinking through the murk. Each sound told part of a story that would echo through generations. The modern vessel moved in silence. Her dark hull slipped through trails of drifting oil and ash. Above, the surface shimmered with the reflection of orange flame. The sea itself seemed wounded, clouded with silt, speckled with rising bubbles, and glowing faintly in the dim light from above. Inside, the crew spoke little. The air was thick with unspoken thoughts, the weight of what they'd seen pressing on every word. On the monitors, sonar outlines of ships were visible, massive, distorted shapes resting on the harbor floor. One of them still vented air slowly, a trapped hull exhaling its final breath. The commander approached the forward display. "That's the Arizona," he said quietly. No one responded. The sonar's slow sweep passed over her again, painting a ghostly image. The shattered decks, the collapsed bow, the silent guns now pointed toward eternity. "Record everything," the commander said softly. "This is history, unfiltered." The technician nodded, hands moving over the controls. Every echo, every frequency, every pulse was stored in the submarine's memory. The last vibrations of the battle preserved in a digital heartbeat. For a long time, they drifted beneath the harbor, tracing the resting places of ships whose names the world would come to know by sorrow. Oklahoma, California, West Virginia, Nevada. Each wreck told its own story. Some lay twisted open like torn paper. Others lay still and whole but silent, the lives within gone. At one point, the sonar caught a faint rhythmic tapping from the direction of the Oklahoma, a sound that, for a moment, made everyone freeze. "Could that be?" one crewman whispered. The commander listened. The sound was faint, uneven, fading, but human. The signal from another time. He lowered his voice. Those were the men trapped inside. They pounded for help. Back then. The sound repeated, slow and desperate. A recording from the past, still echoing through the water 80 years later. The submarine's instruments didn't interpret emotion, but the crew did. The commander closed his eyes. Save it, all of it. Minutes passed in heavy quiet. Up above, the fires continued to burn, staining the sky a dull grey. From the decks of surviving ships, sailors worked tirelessly, pulling their friends from the water, forming bucket lines, cutting through wreckage. The noise had changed, no longer the roar of battle, but the weary chorus of survival. And from below, the submarine listened. To the untrained ear, the ocean might have sounded peaceful, but to the machines and minds on board, it was filled with meaning. The metallic groan of a ship dying, the soft collapse of a bulkhead, the uneven pulse of fires meeting the tide. The sonar operator adjusted his headphones, brow furrowed. "I can still hear the rescue boats," he murmured. Paddles hitting the surface, small engines running slow. The commander nodded. "Keep tracking them. Every sound tells us what came after." The data stream filled with faint signatures, wooden hulls scraping, ropes being thrown, the splash of oars. Each sound became a thread in the invisible tapestry of that morning's aftermath. In the mess hall, the crew sat quietly, drinking tepid coffee. No one could quite escape the thought that, while the world above mourned its losses, they were ghosts at the edge of it, unseen witnesses, untouched but not unmoved. One of the younger sailors broke the silence. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "what happens now? To them, I mean." The commander looked up slowly. "They'll bury their dead. They'll rebuild their ships. And then," he paused, "they'll go to war. The war they were trying to avoid." A murmur passed through the room. Not disagreement, just the shared weight of knowing what would follow. Midway, Coral Sea, the Long Island campaigns, the bomb. History's chain had been set. The Submarine mission wasn't to change it, only to understand it in ways the past never could. Hours later, when the fires above had dimmed into smoke, the commander ordered the vessel to rise closer to the surface. Through the periscope, the world came into view, broken, smouldering, and heartbreakingly still. Ford Island was coated in ash. The harbor's water was streaked black with oil. In the distance, the Nevada sat grounded in the mud, half sunk but upright, her flag still visible through the haze, a symbol, perhaps, of endurance. "Do you see that?" the commander whispered. The officer beside him nodded. "She tried to leave the harbor, got hit again and again, but she kept going." "History remembers courage," the commander said quietly, "but it forgets persistence. That's what this place is. The sound of people refusing to give up." The officer smiled faintly. "Even in defeat," the commander nodded, "especially in defeat." The submarine lingered for a while longer, drifting among the echoes of that day. Its sensors mapped every hull, every vibration, every trace of the disaster, with precision far beyond anything 1941 could have imagined. But no machine could measure grief. No algorithm could quantify the moment when the world shifted from peace to war. That, the crew felt in silence. By afternoon, the harbor began to change again. Tugboats moved through the wreckage. Fires hissed out under streams of seawater. Flags were lowered to half-mast. The radio waves, those invisible messengers of human voice, filled the air with confusion, fear, and resolve. The submarine's communications officer listened to them all. Static-laden transmissions from ships and shore, calling for help, calling for order. "Control, this is Ford Island. We need medical assistance. Repeat, medical assistance. Many casualties. This is Hickam Field. We've been hit. Airfield out of commission. This is Nevada, taking on water, attempting to beach." Each voice was calm, measured, focused. Ordinary people responding to the unimaginable with duty. The commander looked toward the radio operator. "Save those recordings too." "They won't know we heard them," the operator said softly. "They don't have to," the commander replied. "History will." Evening came slowly to Oahu. The fires dimmed, leaving only the ghostly glow of smouldering ships. The smoke thinned, and the stars began to appear, faint and distant. The submarine rested motionless now, a dark observer beneath the night. Above them, a world was counting its losses and finding its strength. The crew gathered in the control room. No one spoke for several minutes. The only sound was the low hum of the engines and the faint crackle of distant radio chatter. Finally, the commander spoke. "This is where it began. For them, for the world that followed, and for us. This is where the echoes reach." He leaned forward, his voice quieter still. "Every sound we've heard today, every explosion, every shout, every heartbeat, will ripple through history, through the Pacific, through decades, through generations. Wars will be fought, lives changed, nations rebuilt, all from this morning." He looked at the black water beyond the glass. "History isn't just written," he said. "It's carried, in waves, in echoes, in memory." The crew sat in stillness, listening to the deep, steady pulse of the ocean. Somewhere above them, the stars shimmered faintly on the surface. The commander's final words of the night drifted quietly through the control room. Mark the coordinates, he said softly. The world above has changed forever. Let's see what the waves remember next. The morning after the attack began quietly. The sky over Pearl Harbor was pale and colorless, like paper washed clean of ink. Smoke still drifted across the water in thin, uncertain lines. The fires were dying, but the smell of oil and ash lingered in the air. From beneath the waves, the modern submarine rose slowly, its sensors tuned to the fragile heartbeat of a world in shock. The harbor that had once echoed with the sounds of daily life, engines idling, sailors laughing, cranes clanging, was now hushed. Only the faint crackle of flames and the low hum of rescue efforts broke the stillness. The crew watched the sonar display, where the shapes of the sunken battleships rested in silence, their outlines softened by silt. Even through the precision of digital mapping, there was something ghostly about them. Great iron giants, now asleep beneath the Pacific. Above, America was waking to the sound of radio. In Washington, telegraph keys rattled through the early hours, each tap carrying grim news across the nation. The messages were short, factual, emotionless, the language of bureaucracy struggling to hold its breath. Air attack, Pearl Harbor, damage extensive. Arizona destroyed, Oklahoma capsized. Heavy loss of life. By the time the sun rose over the mainland, the headlines had already spread from coast to coast. In Honolulu, hospitals overflowed. The wounded filled corridors, and volunteers brought water and blankets to strangers. Nurses worked in silence, their hands steady, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. In makeshift morgues, names were written carefully on scraps of paper. And all the while, in the quiet depths below, the submarine listened, not to voices, but to vibrations, to the new rhythm of the Pacific, now alive with movement. Ships preparing for war, engines starting, orders being shouted. The commander stood at the forward console, eyes fixed on the sonar display. "The fleet's already mobilizing," he murmured. His executive officer nodded. "Patrol craft leaving the harbor, destroyers sweeping the coast." "Too late to stop what's coming," the commander said softly. In the distance, faint signatures appeared. Ships gathering, moving eastward. The beginnings of an American response, cautious but determined. The submarine tracked each one, marking their positions silently. The modern sensors painted the ocean with astonishing clarity. The churn of propellers, the distant hum of aircraft, even the faint throb of engines warming up aboard newly rearmed ships. The Pacific was no longer calm. From the deep, the commander watched a new world forming, a world awakening to the reality of global conflict. The sleeping giant, as one Japanese admiral would later call it, had stirred. He turned to his crew. "We're witnessing the moment the 20th century shifts," he said quietly. "This attack won't end a war. It will begin one." On the shore, soldiers cleared debris. Civilians lined up to give blood. In the radio rooms of the surviving ships, operators sent messages with steady hands. "We will rebuild. We will return fire." But for now, there was only smoke and silence. The submarine-S instruments caught the faint hum of a distant broadcast. A voice carried across radio waves, shaky but resolute. It was President Roosevelt addressing a stunned nation. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The words crackled faintly through static, echoing in the control room. The crew listened in stillness. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The commander closed his eyes. "There it is," he said softly. The hinge of history turning. Outside, the sea rolled gently, indifferent to human wars. But above the water, change moved like a current no one could stop. Factories on the mainland began their transformation. Assembly lines repurposed for weapons, for planes, for ships. Men and women alike answered the call. Posters would soon fill the streets, urging sacrifice, unity, and vengeance. The crew of the submarine watched it all unfold on their displays, timelines scrolling, intercepted signals, early mobilization orders. History was accelerating before their eyes. They could hear the shadows moving, the coded transmissions of the Imperial Navy, the cautious replies of Allied intelligence, the whispers of strategy forming on both sides of the Pacific. The sonar operator adjusted his dials. "Sir, picking up transmissions west of Midway, encrypted Japanese naval codes. Could be fleet movements." The commander nodded. "That's the next step. The Pacific chessboard is already in play." No one aboard the submarine cheered or spoke with excitement. There was no thrill in knowing the future, only the quiet heaviness of inevitability. In one corner of the control room, a young officer stared at the faint outlines of ships on the screen. "Sir," he asked softly, "do you think they have any idea? The sailors who survived? Do they know what they've started?" The commander's gaze stayed fixed on the monitor. "Not yet," he said. "Right now, they're just trying to save each other. Tomorrow, they'll begin to understand." Outside, the water shimmered faintly with dawn light. Above, Pearl Harbor was changing. Wreckage cleared, flags lowered, hands trembling but steady. The submarine rose slowly, its periscope breaching the surface for a brief glimpse of the world above. Through the lens, the commander saw Ford Island, scarred and blackened, but alive with movement. Men in small boats carried supplies, smoke curled gently upward, and through the drifting haze, the tattered flag over the Nevada still waved. He lowered the scope. "That flag," he said softly, "is the first signal. They don't even know it yet, but it means the war has begun." The submarine's engines hummed as they turned away from the harbor. The commander gave one final look at the sonar image, the sleeping hulks below, the new movements above. "Set course east," he ordered quietly. "The Pacific's about to change. Let's see how far the ripples travel." The ocean opened before them, vast and silent. Behind them lay smoke and sorrow. Ahead, signals and shadows, an awakening world, and the long, grinding march of history. The commander's final thought lingered in the dim light of the control room, a whisper almost lost beneath the hum of machinery. History doesn't explode all at once. It begins with a whisper, and then it becomes the sound of marching feet. The submarine dove once more into the deep. The last trace of the harbor faded into static and distance, replaced by the steady rhythm of a new age beginning. The weeks that followed the attack moved like a tide that could not be stopped. Across the United States, the shock of Pearl Harbor hardened into something colder, steadier, and more focused: resolve. Factories that once built cars now turned out tanks. Shipyards worked through the night. Posters appeared in post offices, train stations, and city streets, their messages simple and direct. Remember Pearl Harbor. Beneath the Pacific, the submarine drifted eastward, its silent engines humming like a heartbeat in the dark. Inside, the crew watched history accelerate. The attack had lasted barely 2 hours, but the echoes were now endless, spreading from Oahu to Washington, from the Pacific coast to every corner of the country. The commander stood before the navigation display. The ocean around them seemed unchanged, calm, indifferent, eternal. Yet above, the world was transforming with remarkable speed. "Factories in California, Oregon, Washington," he said softly, reading from the real-time data streams. "Full-scale military production beginning. Liberty ships planned. Aircraft assembly lines expanding. The machine is waking up." The sonar operator nodded faintly. "It's strange, sir. We're sitting in the middle of history's quietest place, but the whole world's starting to move." The commander looked at the dark water beyond the viewport. "It always starts this way. Noise above, silence below. But both carry weight." He turned to the communications console, where intercepted transmissions scrolled across the screen. Military orders, mobilization schedules, congressional reports. Each message short, functional, and freighted with urgency. President signs declaration of war against Japan. Congress votes unanimously. U.S. Navy mobilizing Pacific Fleet assets. Prioritize carrier operations. For the first time in decades, the entire nation was synchronized around a single purpose. In towns across America, the ordinary rhythms of life bent toward war. Teachers left classrooms to join training programs. Mechanics enlisted as flight engineers. Women stepped into factories, their coveralls stained with oil and steel dust. Entire communities turned their hands toward production. The submarine's data feed captured these transformations in subtle ways. Spikes in industrial electricity usage, new shipping routes forming, harbor traffic increasing by the hour. "Sir," one crewman said softly, "it's like watching a sleeping animal open its eyes." The commander nodded. "And once it's fully awake, nothing will slow it down." Meanwhile, the Pacific was growing crowded again. Allied supply ships, destroyers, and new submarines began to appear on sonar, faint outlines moving along long-established routes. Convoys stretched from San Francisco to Hawaii, bringing supplies, fuel, and hope. Every vessel left a signature, a low-frequency hum that the modern submarine detected with ease. "They're rebuilding faster than anyone expected," said the sonar technician. "Because they have to," replied the commander. "They can't afford to fall behind. Every day counts now." The submarine followed one such convoy for several days, cargo ships flanked by destroyers, their wakes forming pale trails in the moonlight. Above the surface, the sea reflected the stars. Below, technology far beyond the era's imagination recorded every motion in silence. It was not curiosity that guided them now, but reverence, a quiet respect for those who labored and sailed through fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. In Washington, President Roosevelt addressed the nation again. The crew listened to his voice as it echoed through the control room, faint but clear through the static. "We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God." The words, once merely hopeful, now carried the weight of inevitability. The nation's factories roared to life. In Detroit, engineers retooled entire production lines overnight. In Seattle, Boeing began producing B-17 bombers in endless rows. In San Diego and Norfolk, shipyards filled with the clang of hammers and the sparks of welding torches. The commander's voice was low, almost reflective. "They're turning fear into motion," he said. "That's the true power of a nation like this. Not anger, but momentum." Outside, the submarine's sensors picked up the faint hum of a new ship under construction. The early stages of a Carrier AS hull being welded in a California dockyard. "Enterprise," the communications officer murmured. "Yorktown, Hornet, the names that will shape the ocean." Each name carried a destiny that the crew already knew, battles to come, victories hard won, and sacrifices that would define a generation. Yet here, in this quiet moment, they were only beginnings, unfinished shapes of steel, echoes of potential. As the days passed, the submarine continued its observation, the Pacific current slow and steady, the world above anything but. In Honolulu, families searched for loved ones still missing. Letters began to arrive on the mainland, their words simple and heartbreaking. "We are safe. We are alive." In small towns across America, parades filled the streets. Flags were raised. Young men lined up outside recruiting offices, their faces calm, their futures unknown. The commander watched it all unfold through the endless data streams. "Each decision," he said quietly, "ripples outward, like the rings from a stone dropped into water. What began in a harbor will now reach the farthest corners of the earth." He turned to the crew. "And for every name remembered in history books, there will be thousands never written. Those are the ones who will carry this war on their shoulders." The submarine rose to periscope depth once more. Through the lens, the Pacific stretched endlessly toward the east. On the horizon, faint contrails of training aircraft crossed the morning sky, the first of many that would soon fill it. The crew stood in silence. No one spoke of strategy, or victory, or revenge. They simply watched. War, in its earliest form, was not the roar of engines or the flash of gunfire. It was paperwork, sweat, discipline, and time. It was the sound of rivets hammered into steel, of men and women counting the days until departure. It was the long, steady breath before the storm returned. The commander finally broke the silence. "We'll head west again soon," he said. "Back toward the front that hasn't formed yet. When the machine they're building moves, it'll move through those waters first." The crew nodded. The submarine began its slow turn back toward the heart of the Pacific. The hum of the engines deepened, echoing through the narrow corridors like a heartbeat. As the vessel slipped deeper into the dark, the commander's thoughts lingered on what he had seen. A nation had gone to sleep one morning in peace and woken in war, but instead of panic, it had answered with purpose, deliberate, patient, unstoppable. And as the submarine disappeared beneath the waves, one quiet question hung in the stillness, like a breath waiting to be exhaled. When the engines of war begin to turn, can anyone, even history itself, make them stop again? The Pacific Ocean, once an open expanse of trade routes and scattered islands, had transformed almost overnight into a map of advancing lines and falling defenses. After Pearl Harbor, Japan did not pause. It surged forward, swift, precise, and unstoppable, as if history itself had leaned in its favor. In the weeks that followed December 7th, Japanese forces struck everywhere at once: Manila, Hong Kong, Malaya, Guam. Names that once seemed distant and abstract to most Americans were now broadcast nightly in reports heavy with defeat. To the men aboard the modern submarine, watching from below, the ocean above had become a highway of convoys and ambition. The commander studied a projection on the main screen, a glowing red wave sweeping across the Pacific map. "They're not just fighting battles," he murmured. "They're claiming an empire." The sonar officer nodded slowly. "From the Philippines to Singapore, every island is a step closer to the oil they need." It was the fuel that mattered most. Japan's war machine ran on oil, and with the American embargo cutting off its supply, expansion had become necessity. In the months leading up to the attack, their strategy had been drawn in fine lines across maps like this one. The plan was ruthless in its clarity: secure the Dutch East Indies, the Malayan Peninsula, and Borneo, all rich with oil and rubber. Control the Pacific Rim before America could recover. Above the submarine, the sea lanes filled with motion. Japanese carriers, sleek and disciplined, moved in organized patterns. Supply ships followed behind, protected by destroyers with fresh paint and new flags. From the observation deck, the crew watched their shadows glide silently beneath these fleets, unseen and undetected. The ocean around them thrummed with power. Each ship, each movement, was part of a vast and deliberate choreography. "The precision is frightening," the navigator whispered. "They've rehearsed this for years." He was right. Japan's Navy had spent the better part of a decade perfecting this art of coordination, from shipbuilding to flight drills, from signals to fuel logistics. Where the West had underestimated, Japan had prepared. In Manila, American and Filipino troops fell back toward Bataan, the jungle closing around them like a slow curtain. In Hong Kong, resistance ended in flames. In Singapore, the fortress city once thought impregnable was now surrounded. The Gibraltar of the East, they called it. But even stone could crumble when struck from all sides. The submarine's communication officer read aloud from intercepted broadcasts: Singapore bombed for the 4th consecutive day. British forces withdrawing toward the causeway. Japanese troops advancing through the Malayan jungle with bicycles and bayonets. The commander leaned back in his chair. "Bicycles," he said quietly. "Sometimes history turns not on machines, but on something as simple as that." And indeed, it did. The Japanese Army's rapid movement through the dense tropical terrain, often dismissed as impossible by Western commanders, was achieved with sheer efficiency. Soldiers pedaled silently through the jungle, hauling supplies, rifles, and determination. Where tanks would have bogged down, men moved freely. On the submarine's display, the map flickered again, new territories falling, one after another. The Pacific, once blue and open, now seemed stitched together with lines of control. Inside the vessel, the crew felt the weight of it. "This," one of them said softly, "is what victory looks like before anyone calls it that." The commander said nothing. His eyes were on the dark currents outside, on the faint sonar traces of warships above. Every movement, every signal pulse told a story. The Imperial Navy, with its mighty carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Shokaku, Zuikaku, ruled the waves for now. Each carried aircraft that could reach farther than any American base at that time. From the Coral Sea to the Indian Ocean, the red rising sun gleamed on wings that seemed untouchable. But the commander knew no power lasted forever. "Success," he murmured, "is always loudest before it breaks." The submarine moved northward, keeping a careful distance. Through the periscope, the crew caught glimpses of the fleets, tight formations of ships, precise in their spacing, disciplined in their motion. Above, aircraft took off in waves, their propellers glinting in the early light. There was beauty in it, in its own cold way, the efficiency of human will organized for destruction. They recorded every movement, every radio frequency, every pattern. It was as if they were chronicling inevitability, history written in sonar pings and navigation charts. Farther south, the Battle of the Java Sea unfolded. Allied cruisers, British, Dutch, American, faced Japan's fleet in a desperate, disjointed defense. Outgunned and uncoordinated, the Allies fought bravely, but fell one by one beneath the rising tide. The submarine received fragments of the aftermath, static-filled transmissions, short-lived distress calls. "Enemy torpedoes inbound. We've lost contact with abandon ship." Then silence. The commander closed his eyes for a moment. "Even courage has a sound," he said, "and when it fades, the sea remembers." Above them, the Pacific stretched wider than ever, its surface calm once more, as if indifferent to the chaos it concealed. In Japan, news of victory filled the airwaves. The public believed their empire destined to rule the Pacific for 1,000 years. Propaganda films showed gleaming fleets, cheering soldiers, and banners unfurling across conquered cities. The submarine's historian, a quiet man who rarely spoke, finally said, "They think the tide belongs to them." "It does," replied the commander, "for now, but tides never stay still." The men said nothing more. They all understood what he meant. History had cycles of rise and fall, expansion and collapse, each powered by the same forces: pride, necessity, and time. For now, Japan's advance seemed unstoppable. But beneath the waves, the future watched in silence. In a small coastal village near Yokosuka, a fisherman looked out over the dark sea, unaware of the silent machine gliding beneath him. A visitor from a world yet to come. He had sons in the Navy. He believed in the Empire's destiny, and like millions of others, he could not yet see the price that would follow. The commander watched the sonar display flicker with movement: fleets, convoys, submarines, transports, the vast machinery of empire in motion. "History doesn't rush," he said quietly. "It builds, patiently, layer by layer, until the weight becomes too much to bear." He stood for a long time in the dim light, hands folded behind his back. The hum of the engines seemed almost like breathing. Outside, the sea was dark and endless. Above, an empire burned bright. And somewhere between the two, in the space between triumph and ruin, the future waited. As the submarine descended once more, the commander's voice broke the stillness. "Let them advance," he said softly. "The farther they go, the longer the return." No one replied. The lights dimmed to night mode, the control room bathed in a soft red glow. On the main display, the Pacific shimmered like a living thing, beautiful, dangerous, and vast beyond imagination. And as the submarine drifted deeper into the black, one quiet thought lingered in the still water, echoing faintly in the hum of the engines. How far could an empire expand before it began to collapse under its own weight? The sea was quiet again, deceptively so. The months that had followed Japan's surge across the Pacific had created an empire of vast reach, but also of fragile design. Each new conquest stretched its supply lines thinner. Each victory demanded more fuel, more ships, more men. The submarine glided beneath those waters, its instruments recording the slow, invisible shift of momentum. Above, the Pacific no longer belonged solely to Japan. Something was changing, slowly, but unmistakably. The commander stood over the navigation display, the faint light tracing the arc of the Midway Atoll. A small cluster of sand and coral, scarcely visible on most maps, yet destined to become the pivot on which the Pacific War would turn. Midway, he murmured, as if testing the weight of the word. Halfway to everything, to Hawaii, to Asia, to victory or defeat. The sonar officer leaned closer. Sir, are you sure this is where it changes? The commander nodded slowly. It always happens in places no one expects. Not in capitals, not in cities, but on tiny islands surrounded by silence. By June 1942, the United States had begun to rebuild, quickly, efficiently, almost defiantly. Aircraft carriers like Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown were at sea again. Pilots, many barely trained months earlier, were now veterans of desperate defense. Mechanics worked in round-the-clock shifts, rebuilding damaged planes by lantern light. From deep below, the submarine listened to their movements. Faint, methodical, precise. Each vessel's sonar signature was like a heartbeat, steady and determined. In Tokyo, Japanese strategists planned their next decisive blow. The operation that would crush American resistance once and for all. Their target, Midway. The plan was bold. Lure the US carriers into a trap, destroy them, and force peace on Japan's terms. But as history would have it, plans have a way of unraveling in silence. The submarine's communications array caught fragments of the story unfolding, code names, intercepted signals, weather reports. It all seemed ordinary on the surface, yet hidden within the noise was something remarkable. American intelligence had broken parts of Japan's naval code. The crew listened quietly as the message came through. Confirmed. AF is Midway. The commander smiled faintly. They know, he said. They finally learned to listen. For weeks, US forces had monitored Japanese communications, piecing together the plan like a puzzle assembled in shadows. By the time the Imperial fleet moved toward Midway, Admiral Nimitz already knew when and where they would strike. The stage was set for one of history's most improbable battles. On June 4th, 1942, the Pacific dawned clear and windless. The sea stretched to every horizon, empty at first glance. But hidden just beyond the curve of the world, two vast fleets hunted one another, unseen, unheard, yet impossibly close. From below, the submarine detected the movement first, the low, rhythmic vibrations of engines in formation. Multiple carriers, the sonar operator whispered, bearing northwest. Above them, Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, launched waves of aircraft toward Midway. Bombers roared low over the water, their shadows racing across the surf. At the same time, American planes, weary, undertrained, and vastly outnumbered, rose from Midway's airstrips to meet them. Most never returned. The commander closed his eyes as the reports came in. Names, losses, coordinates. Every battle begins in confusion, he said softly. And for a while, it stays that way. But fate, as always, has a strange sense of timing. By late morning, 3 American carrier groups, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, had launched their own attack. The first waves missed entirely. Torpedo squadrons, flying low and slow, were cut apart by Japanese fighters. Entire units vanished in minutes. For a moment, it seemed Japan's dominance would continue, inevitable, unbroken. Then, at 10:22 a.m., everything changed. The submarine's sensors caught it as a tremor, a faint, distant shockwave rippling through the water. Above, American dive bombers, arriving by sheer luck and courage, had found the Japanese carriers unguarded, decks crowded with refueling planes and armed bombs. In the space of 5 minutes, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were burning, great columns of black smoke rising like pillars into the sky. The commander watched the data appear on his screen. Sudden spikes in heat, explosions registering across sonar like thunder rolling beneath the sea. "It's happening," the navigator whispered. The commander nodded. "Yes, the balance is shifting." For the Japanese, it was chaos. For the Americans, disbelief. Pilots returning to Enterprise could see the burning wrecks behind them. The pride of the Imperial Navy reduced to flames. By nightfall, only one Japanese carrier remained, Hiryu. She launched one final desperate strike, damaging Yorktown beyond repair before being found, and sunk herself. 4 carriers lost, hundreds of planes gone, thousands of sailors vanished into the sea. In the dark silence below, the submarine drifted through the aftermath. The ocean was filled with debris, splintered wood, drifting life rafts, the faint glow of burning oil on the surface. The crew stood quietly. No one spoke. The commander finally said, "War changes direction in moments like these, not because of superiority, but because of timing, chance, and exhaustion." He turned toward the observation port. The faint red reflection of fire glimmered far above. "For the first time since Pearl Harbor," he said softly, "the Pacific breathes differently." On shore, at Midway, the air smelled of salt, smoke, and oil. American crews dragged wreckage from runways and tended to the wounded. They didn't yet understand what they had done, that the course of the entire war had shifted. Back on the mainland, when the news finally reached Washington, there was disbelief, then relief, then slowly, hope. Midway had not ended the war, but it had ended the illusion of Japanese invincibility. The empire's expansion had met its limit, and beyond that limit lay decline. The commander watched as the currents began to change direction, literal and symbolic. "The Pacific turns," he murmured, "and once a tide turns, it rarely turns back." He thought of the men who had fought that day, the young pilots who had launched into chaos, the sailors who had gone down with their ships, the commanders on both sides who had gambled everything on timing and weather and luck. History would remember the winners, of course, but here, beneath the waves, there was no victory, only silence, and the slow settling of what had once burned. The submarine moved on, engines humming low, gliding through the quiet aftermath. Somewhere far above, survivors drifted on makeshift rafts, watching the smoke fade into the night. They didn't know what would come next, only that the ocean had changed. The commander turned to his crew. "Remember this moment," he said. "It's when the unstoppable begins to slow, when an empire realizes it's not immortal." The control room lights dimmed again. Outside, the last flickers of firelight vanished into the black water, and as the submarine slipped deeper into the dark, the question lingered, soft, persistent, and echoing like a thought carried by the current. When a tide turns, does it choose its direction, or do we merely follow where history pulls us? By the time the smoke of Midway faded across the horizon, a quieter, darker war had already begun. One fought not in the open skies or across the bright decks of carriers, but far beneath the waves. It was here, in the cold silence of the Pacific depths, that the longest and loneliest struggle of the war unfolded. A war of patience, of shadows, and of sound. The modern submarine drifted through that same dark ocean, watching as the age of underwater warfare took shape above and around it. Once, the submarine had been a crude experiment, slow, limited, fragile. But in 1942, it was becoming something else, a predator that could strike unseen, then vanish back into the deep before the enemy even knew where to look. The commander stood before a holographic projection of the Pacific theater. The map glowed faintly, dotted with hundreds of shifting points, Allied submarines spreading like invisible threads across Japan's empire. 57 US submarines active, he murmured. More launching every month, mostly Gato class, diesel electric. range about 11,000 miles. He paused, tracing one of the paths with his finger. They'll run out of air before they run out of targets. The sonar technician nodded. And the Japanese? They don't have enough destroyers to guard every route. No, said the commander. And that's what will break them, not the battles, but the hunger that comes when supply ships stop arriving. The Pacific, vast as it was, had turned into a net. Every convoy, every freighter, every tanker carried Japan's future. Oil from the Indies, rice from Burma, ore from the Philippines. Each one had to reach home. Each one was a heartbeat in the empire's veins. The American submarines began to cut those veins, one by one. Their attacks were not fast or glorious. They were methodical, often terrifying in their solitude. A crew might spend weeks hunting a single target. They would lie silent for hours, engines off, every man holding his breath as Japanese destroyers passed above. In those moments, even time seemed to hesitate. The modern submarine sensors detected it all. The faint thrum of propellers, the sudden roar of depth charges, the haunting echoes of collapsing hulls. In one sector, they tracked the USS Wahoo, commanded by Dudley "Mush" Morton, a name that would soon carry weight across the Pacific. The Wahoo moved like a ghost, slipping through the Kuril Islands and into the Sea of Japan. The commander read from the digital log. Engaged 8 ships, sank 5, damaged 2, surfaced to rescue survivors. He looked up. Bravery, bordering on madness, he said quietly. These men hunted in the enemy's own waters. The crew listened as the sonar feed replayed the sound of Wahoo-S torpedoes hitting their marks, muffled explosions, water trembling around them like distant thunder. But beneath the triumph was tragedy. Submarine warfare was a lonely occupation. One wrong depth, one faulty valve, one missed signal, and an entire crew could vanish without a trace. In 1943 alone, more than 3,000 submariners never came home. The commander's tone softened. They'll never find most of them. The ocean doesn't return what it takes. The submarine glided silently past a section of seabed where one such wreck rested. Its steel hull twisted and broken by pressure. Its story sealed forever in the dark. No sound reached that place anymore. Only the steady, patient heartbeat of the deep. Above the surface, the war pressed on. Japanese convoys adapted, traveling at night, weaving through storm fronts, hugging coastlines. They used escort ships, sonar pings, and depth charges. But still, the losses mounted. For every destroyer Japan built, America launched 3 more submarines. For every convoy lost, another left harbor with smaller ships and smaller hopes. By 1944, the results were unmistakable. Japanese fuel reserves had fallen by half. Merchant fleets were vanishing faster than they could be replaced. The submarine's data feed traced the decline, a slow, inevitable descent. Oil output, 40%. Shipping capacity, 30%. Rice imports, collapsing, the analyst read softly. They're still fighting battles, but they're starving. The commander looked up. That's how you win a war at sea, he said. You don't just fight the enemy. You make the ocean itself turn against him. The modern vessel rose closer to the surface, its sensors sweeping the open water. Above, another U.S. sub, USS Tang, under Commander Richard O'Kane, was stalking a convoy off Formosa. The crew of the Tang waited for hours in total silence, torpedoes armed, every man listening for the faint signal that would mean fire. When it came, the ocean lit up. 4 hits, 4 ships gone. The submarine dove deep as destroyers swarmed, dropping charge after charge into the black. Through the hydrophones, the sea became a symphony of violence, booming pressure waves, twisting metal, hissing air. The commander of the modern sub closed his eyes, listening. This is what courage sounds like when no one can see it, he murmured. Hours later, Tang escaped. Days later, she sank again, this time by her own malfunctioning torpedo, a cruel turn of fate that killed most of her crew. The ocean, it seemed, gave and took in equal measure. The commander watched as the sonar display cleared again, the echoes fading into silence. In every war, he said softly, some victories come at too high a cost to celebrate. The submarine descended once more into the deep. Around them, the Pacific was darker than ever, the war above intensifying. Yet down here, time moved slowly. The historian on board finally spoke. In the end, he said quietly, these men, the ones who fought below the surface, changed the war more than anyone will ever know. The commander nodded, and they did it without fanfare, just steel, silence, and endurance. Outside the hull, a faint current passed, warm water from the Philippine Sea drifting northward. The submarine moved with it, carried like a thought through the vast, indifferent ocean. The men inside said little. They watched, listened, and remembered. Above them, the surface glittered faintly under moonlight. Somewhere, another submarine hunted. Somewhere else, another was hunted in return. And through it all, the war beneath the waves continued, unseen, relentless, patient. As the modern submarine drifted deeper into the dark, the commander's voice was almost a whisper. History will speak of battles and generals, he said, but it's the ones who fought in silence who carried the longest burden. The control room lights dimmed again, leaving only the glow of instruments and the faint hum of power through the steel. Outside, the sea pressed close, infinite and still. And as they moved through that quiet abyss, one question lingered in the water like a breath that refused to fade. If victory comes from silence, who remembers the ones who never surfaced to see it? The sea that had once swallowed Pearl Harbor now carried the war back toward Japan. One island, one beachhead, one cratered jungle at a time. The Pacific, endless and blue, was no longer a quiet expanse of water. It had become a chessboard, and every move was written in blood and fire. The modern submarine surfaced slowly, its hull gleaming under the moon. Across its digital display, a map of the Pacific flickered to life. Dots of red spreading from the Philippines to the Solomons, across New Guinea, toward the Marianas. The commander spoke quietly. This is where the tide turns again, he said. Not beneath the sea this time, but from the sky and on the sand. The war was transforming. No longer a struggle of fleets in open water, it was now an inferno of air raids and amphibious assaults. Each island, tiny specks in a vast ocean, became a fortress, a death trap, a name the world would never forget. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The modern vessel replayed archival footage, black and white explosions blooming across palm-lined beaches. The sound of waves was drowned beneath the roar of engines and the rattle of machine guns. Narration slowed. At Guadalcanal, 1942, America's first counterstrike, a place of mosquitoes, jungle rot, and endless rain. The first US Marines waded ashore, faces streaked with mud, rifles held above their heads. They found themselves not in conquest, but survival. For months, they fought off waves of Japanese counterattacks, disease, and hunger. At night, the sea itself seemed alive with gunfire, flashes from naval duels, the burning silhouettes of ships sinking in the dark. They called it Iron Bottom Sound, a graveyard for both sides, where destroyers, cruisers, and dreams of empire all went to rest. The commander's voice was low. It was the first time Japan was stopped, not by distance, not by diplomacy, but by endurance. The map shifted. 1943, the Solomons, the Marshalls. Every new landing was a test of will. The Americans called it island hopping, but there was nothing simple about it. Each assault demanded precision. Air superiority first, then naval bombardment, then the slow, brutal crawl inland. Fire from the sky came first. Waves of B-24 Liberators and carrier-based Hellcats raining destruction on bunkers and airfields. The earth shook beneath their fury. Then came the men, Marines and soldiers, pushing through coral, ash, and shattered palms. The historian aboard the modern sub spoke quietly over the static. It wasn't just about taking land, it was about getting closer, to Tokyo, to the heart of the empire. Every island was another step toward ending the war. The commander nodded, and every step cost thousands of lives. The screen displayed the Battle of Tarawa, November 1943. 76 hours of chaos. The landing craft struck coral reefs, leaving Marines wading chest-deep through fire. Many never reached shore. Those who did fought yard by yard through smoke and sand until silence fell at last. Of 4,500 Japanese defenders, only 17 surrendered. The sea turned red, then calm again. Tarawa was one island, said the commander, but it showed what every island would cost. By 1944, the skies belonged to America. Carrier groups roamed like floating cities. Waves of aircraft struck Japanese strongholds without warning: Saipan, Tinian, Guam. Entire garrisons were buried beneath bombardments so vast that even the clouds seemed to shudder. On the modern submarine's display, a formation of B-29 superfortresses shimmered into view, massive gleaming machines carrying the war to Japan's doorstep. Their engines thrummed like distant thunder. This, the commander whispered, was fire from the sky. The B-29s brought the war to Japan's home islands. For the first time, cities burned beneath American bombs. Industrial centers became infernos. The sky glowed orange even at midnight. But the cost of reaching that point had already been paid. In jungles, on beaches, in the ruins of once green islands, now turned to ash. The historian's voice trembled slightly. Saipan, that's where the war changed forever. Civilians jumped from cliffs rather than surrender. Japanese command realized the homeland itself was next. The modern submarine replayed the radio fragments, frantic voices, explosions, the hollow sound of wind sweeping across shattered cliffs. Then, Okinawa, 1945, the final island, the bloodiest battle of the Pacific. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers, 12,000 Americans dead, civilians caught between them. The sky black with kamikaze planes diving like flaming arrows, engines screaming, ships burned, waves boiled. The sea itself seemed to mourn. After Okinawa, said the commander softly, everyone knew what an invasion of Japan would mean. The modern submarine moved silently through the waters where those battles had once raged. Its sensors scanned wrecks lying deep below, tanks rusting in coral, helmets half buried in silt, the outlines of ships still standing proud on the seabed. History remembers the victories, the commander murmured, but the ocean remembers the cost. Outside, the Pacific shimmered faintly, calm, blue, deceptively peaceful. The men inside the submarine watched in silence as sonar pings reflected off a sunken aircraft carrier, the USS Lexington, resting on the seabed like a sleeping giant. The fire has faded, said the historian, but the echoes are still here. The commander turned away from the screen. The island war wasn't just about land, he said. It was about proving who could endure longer, who could keep fighting when the sky itself seemed to be falling. As the modern vessel descended again, the light dimmed. The hum of its engines filled the silence. Outside, the wrecks of two navies lay side by side, enemies in life, equals in death. The narrator's tone softened to a whisper. This was the Pacific in 1945, a place where every island burned and every victory carried the taste of smoke. The submarine drifted onward, guided by invisible currents. The war above had moved closer to its terrible conclusion, and beneath the waves, the past was stirring once more, waiting for its story to be told. And in that silence, one truth lingered, cold and unchanging. When war reaches the sky, the world below never forgets. The fires of the Pacific had dimmed, but the smoke had not yet cleared. Above the ruins of Tokyo, over the ashes of Berlin, the world seemed to hold its breath. The guns had fallen silent, yet the tension that followed was heavier than sound. You could almost feel it, a shift, subtle at first, Allies who had fought side by side began to look at one another not as friends, but as future rivals. The modern submarine glided through still waters, its screens filled now not with war maps of the Pacific, but the divided map of Europe. Red spreading east, blue holding west. Two colors, and a line between them that would define an age. The commander spoke quietly. They called it peace, he said. But it felt more like a pause. After the atom bomb fell, the world entered a strange twilight. In Washington and Moscow, victory parades masked the unease that had already begun to take root. The alliance that had crushed fascism was dissolving into suspicion. Churchill's voice echoed faintly from the submarine's archive. His 1946 speech in Fulton, Missouri. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. The words seem to hang in the dim control room, like fog rolling through the corridors of history. For the men aboard the submarine, listeners from another century, the phrase carried weight. It was not just a metaphor. It was a wall of fear, of ideology, of quiet wars fought in shadows. The war that had begun with bombers and battleships would now be fought with spies, satellites, and words. And yet, it began, as all things do, with the smallest of choices. In Berlin, soldiers built fences from barbed wire. In Eastern Europe, elections turned into occupations. In the West, promises of freedom hardened into policies of containment. The modern submarine watched from afar, its instruments tracing the spread of influence like ripples across the globe. One side believed it was defending liberty. The other believed it was securing equality. Both believed they were saving the world from the mistakes of the past. The narrator's tone remained calm, measured. In the years after World War II, the old alliances shattered into a new order. The United States emerged as a superpower, its factories humming, its navy stretched across every ocean. The Soviet Union, vast and wounded but unbroken, turned its strength inward, rebuilding, rearming, and reimagining the world in its own image. And between them, the rest of humanity tried to breathe. The commander gestured toward a map of the Pacific once more. Even here, the divide reached. Japan, rebuilt under American guidance, became a symbol of recovery, while China, fresh from civil war, turned red. The historian aboard the vessel spoke softly. In less than 5 years, the war that was supposed to end all wars had given birth to another. One fought without battles, yet no less dangerous. The submarine drifted silently beneath the surface, as if unwilling to disturb the fragile calm above. The world of 1947 was weary but restless. Factories that once built tanks now made cars. Airfields that once launched bombers now sent mail across oceans. But behind every act of reconstruction lay the memory of destruction. Even in peace, the machinery of war continued to hum. The narrator's voice slowed. You can almost hear it, can't you? The ticking of a new kind of weapon. The whisper of distrust. At Los Alamos, new bombs were being tested. Larger, deadlier, built for a war that had not yet begun. In Moscow, scientists raced to catch up. The first atomic monopoly lasted only 4 years. By 1949, both sides held the power to destroy the world. And with that realization, something strange happened. The fear that had once ended wars now ensured they would never truly begin. The modern submarine's screens shifted again to 1950, Korea, the first test of the new order. Communism against capitalism, fought not in Berlin or Moscow, but on a distant peninsula most soldiers had never heard of before. It was a brutal, grinding war. Mountains, rivers, and frozen trenches. Millions dead. No victory. Only a line on a map, the 38th parallel. The commander sighed. So this is how the world learned to fight without winning. The historian nodded. And how peace began to look a lot like exhaustion. In the quiet that followed, the submarine replayed the sound of static, old radio reports of the Marshall Plan, of NATO's formation, of Soviet parades in Red Square. Each headline felt like a new battlefront in a war no one dared to name. The narrator continued softly, steady and reflective. The 20th century had entered its longest night, a war fought in silence, in signals, in the careful language of diplomats and spies. The bombs no longer fell, but the fear of them lingered, invisible, constant, unending. On the submarine's radar, ghostly outlines of early nuclear submarines appeared. America's USS Nautilus and the Soviet K-3 Leninsky Komsomol. The future of warfare was returning to the depths. Under the sea, said the commander, the balance of power took on a new shape. Silent, unseen, waiting, just like us. Outside, the ocean was still. The warships of another age lay rusting far below. Above, in the world of the living, nations rearmed for a conflict that everyone hoped would never come. The historian's voice softened almost to a whisper. History rarely ends. It only changes its uniform. The submarine's lights dimmed, and for a moment, the crew watched the faint pulse of sonar. One heartbeat of the Cold War. Steady, distant, unstoppable. Then came the question that lingered, like a ripple in time. If peace requires constant preparation for war, was the world ever truly at peace? The ocean has always been a patient witness. It does not hurry to remember, nor does it forget. When the Second World War ended, the seas fell quiet, but only for a moment. Beneath the calm surface, a new race was beginning. Not of soldiers this time, but of engineers. The modern submarine moved through the black depths with silent purpose, its sensors humming softly. If one could listen closely, the water carried whispers, the hum of reactors, the murmur of propellers, the distant echo of machines, testing the limits of what humanity could build. The commander spoke in a low voice. The sea became the new frontier, and the empire that could master it would rule the world. In the years following 1945, navies changed faster than they ever had in human history. The battleships of the Old World, proud steel giants like Yamato, Bismarck, and Iowa, faded into museums or scrap. Their time had ended the moment the first aircraft carrier and atomic bomb appeared together in the same sky. Now, dominance would not be measured in size or armor, but in silence, precision, and endurance. The modern submarine's display came alive with the timeline of progress. 1948, the first sonar-guided torpedoes. 1954, USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine. 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, a metal sphere that changed everything, proving that what traveled through the sky could also guide what moved beneath the waves. The historian aboard the vessel spoke softly, the words flowing like tide. Power shifted from fleets to machines, from admirals to scientists, from the open ocean to the deep. Nuclear propulsion changed everything. A conventional submarine could stay underwater for 2 days before it had to surface for air. A nuclear submarine could remain submerged for months, unseen, untouchable. It was no longer a vessel of war, but a weapon of deterrence. A silent guardian carrying the most destructive force ever created by human hands. Engines of empire, the commander murmured, not for conquest, but for balance. The concept was strange, even poetic. The deadliest ships ever built were meant not to fight, but to prevent fighting. They roamed the world's oceans as invisible promises of retaliation. Every sonar ping was a reminder that peace, fragile as it was, survived only because of mutual fear. The submarine's sonar traced outlines across the map. The vast, cold patrol routes of the Atlantic and Pacific, where American and Soviet submarines once stalked one another like ghosts. They called it the cat and mouse game. One side would listen, the other would hide. Every sound mattered. A click, a vibration, the turn of a screw. The historian continued. It was a war of mathematics and patience. The Cold War's quietest battles were fought in decibels, not explosions. The modern submarine slowed as it passed over a trench, the Mariana, the deepest place on Earth. Down there, light had never touched the ocean floor, and yet, Even in that endless dark, humanity had left its mark. Listening devices, cables, relics of a time when every sound beneath the sea was a potential threat. The narrator's tone softened. Imagine the men who served aboard those early nuclear vessels. Months without sunlight, the constant hum of the reactor, 1,000 feet beneath the waves, yet still within reach of the world's end. They carried missiles armed with multiple nuclear warheads, enough to destroy entire nations in minutes. They trained to launch within seconds of receiving a coded signal, one they prayed would never come. The commander looked at the faint green glow of the submarine's digital readouts. Mutually assured destruction, he said quietly. Mad, the most fragile piece in history. Above, the surface world turned to science and satellites, the space race, the arms race, the race for hearts and minds. But beneath the oceans, another competition grew in silence. The Soviets launched the Hotel-class subs, then the Yankee, then the enormous Typhoon, nearly the length of 2 football fields, carrying 20 intercontinental missiles. The Americans answered with George Washington, Ohio, Los Angeles, names that carried the weight of history, now repurposed for the machines that carried history's end. The narrator paused, letting the hum of the sea fill the space between sentences. Each submarine was a nation unto itself, crews isolated for months, guided by sonar and ritual. Aboard, time lost its rhythm. The same meals, the same watch rotations, the same voices echoing through steel corridors. Men played cards beside nuclear weapons. They wrote letters they would not send for weeks. They read the same novels over and over, memorizing every line. And always, the thought lingered. If the order came, would they turn their keys? The historian's voice softened. In the Cold War seas, peace depended not on governments, but on individuals. Ordinary sailors with extraordinary responsibility. The submarine's commander nodded slowly. They were engineers, not conquerors, and yet they held the fate of the world in their hands. Outside, the ocean whispered around the hull, timeless, indifferent, ancient. It had seen the rise and fall of every empire: Rome, Britain, Japan, the Soviet Union. Each one had built its fleet. Each one believed it would last forever. The narrator spoke again, quieter now, like a tide receding. Technology gives us power, but the ocean reminds us that power never truly belongs to us. It only passes through. The modern submarine rose toward the surface, where light shimmered faintly through the water. As it broke through, the horizon glowed with dawn, soft, muted, endless. Somewhere above, satellites orbited silently, and planes traced thin lines across the morning sky. The commander watched in silence. The Cold War built wonders, he said, and it built walls, even beneath the sea. The historian added, and every wall, eventually, begins to crack. The submarine drifted on, engines humming softly, as the world above shifted toward yet another turning point. For all its noise, the 20th century had been defined by silence, the quiet of submarines, the stillness of fear, the hush that follows the end of an age. And so, as the Cold War deepened and nations built their floating fortresses, one quiet question remained, unanswered, echoing through both steel and sea. If peace depends on the perfection of machines, what happens when the machines fail? The ocean grows quiet where the world begins to freeze. At the top of the earth, the sea thickens into glass, a vast white wilderness where wind replaces sound and sunlight comes and goes like a whisper. Here, beneath layers of ice older than memory, another chapter of the Cold War unfolded. A secret one, a place where no flag could fly, and yet every nation wanted to claim a piece of the silence. The modern submarine drifted under the Arctic shelf, its hull groaning softly as the pressure increased. Above, the ice was thick, 20 feet, maybe more. No sound, no motion, only the slow creak of the frozen ceiling and the hum of the reactor far below. The commander's voice was low, almost reverent. This was the last frontier. No one ruled it. Yet everyone feared what might be hidden there. In the 1950s, both East and West turned their eyes north. The Arctic was more than a frozen desert. It was a shortcut. The shortest path between the United States and the Soviet Union wasn't across the Atlantic or Pacific, but straight over the pole. Whoever controlled that route could see first, strike first, survive longest. The historian aboard the submarine began to narrate quietly, his tone measured and calm. In 1958, the world changed again. The USS Nautilus, the first nuclear-powered submarine, became the first vessel to reach the North Pole, beneath the ice. It was a triumph of engineering and endurance. The crew spent days navigating in total darkness, guided only by instruments, moving under a ceiling of ice that could not be broken. The submarine's digital display replayed archival data, grainy black and white images of men in heavy sweaters, their breath visible in the cold. They looked both exhausted and proud. When Nautilus emerged from beneath the pole, the world realized that the Arctic was no longer impassable. It was now a passage. The commander exhaled slowly. And with that, he said, the Arctic stopped being a mystery and became a battlefield, one without borders. Through the 1960s and 70s, the ice above hid a quiet war. American and Soviet submarines patrolled beneath it, tracing invisible routes, listening for one another's presence through layers of frozen silence. No one could see them. Few even knew they were there. It was the ultimate game of shadows, sonar against sonar, nerve against nerve. The historian's voice softened. They called it the silent service. The men aboard those submarines lived in darkness for months, their only constant companions. The sound of the reactor, the creak of metal, and the knowledge that a mistake could mean the end. Outside the hull, the modern submarine S-lights flickered across the seabed, a desolate landscape of ridges and frozen mud. Occasionally, faint outlines appeared, an old cable, a broken probe, a forgotten sensor array, remnants of decades of listening. For during the Cold War, both sides planted networks of underwater microphones, the SOSA system in the west and the Soviet Gamma network in the east. Every sound beneath the sea, a whale, an iceberg, a passing submarine, became a clue, a potential threat, or a false alarm. The Arctic was not just a passageway. It was a chessboard made of ice. The commander spoke again, his voice almost lost beneath the soft hum of the engines. There were places even we couldn't go. Under the thickest ice, sonar echoes would twist and bend. A submarine could vanish there completely, like a shadow swallowed by light. The modern submarine slowed as it passed through one such corridor, a tunnel of dark blue beneath the ice, where temperature and pressure distorted every signal. It was quiet here, too quiet. A perfect hiding place, then and now. The narrator's tone deepened slightly, the rhythm steady, lulling. The Arctic was a paradox, empty yet full of meaning, lifeless yet filled with movement. Every nation claimed they sought peace, but beneath the ice, they prepared for survival. Sometimes their missions met tragedy. The USS Thresher, lost in 1963 during deep-diving tests. The Soviet K-129 vanished in 1968 somewhere between Hawaii and Kamchatka, an entire crew swallowed by the sea, their purpose unknown. The Americans launched a secret recovery effort called Project Azorian, part salvage, part espionage, part eulogy. The historian's voice trembled slightly. It was one of the strangest operations in naval history, a mining ship built to recover a submarine from 3 miles below, under the cover of darkness and silence. The Arctic knew all of it, every secret, every signal, every failed experiment, and yet it remained indifferent, its ice sealing away truth and wreckage alike. As the modern submarine continued beneath the ice, the crew watched in silence. Their screens displayed sonar ghosts, the echoes of old submarines, now wrecks entombed in cold darkness. There was no movement, only the steady rhythm of the ocean, the pulse of time itself. The commander whispered, "The Cold War built its quietest monuments down here. not in stone or steel, but in silence. Above them, auroras rippled faintly through the ice, green and blue curtains of light that danced across the surface. The colors filtered down faintly, painting the submarine's hull in pale, dreamlike hues. It was almost peaceful. Almost. The historian's tone turned reflective. The Arctic frontier was never conquered. It was only endured. The men who patrolled these waters didn't fight battles. They lived inside one, stretched out across years of cold and waiting. Silence filled the control room. Somewhere far off, a faint rumble, perhaps shifting ice, or the echo of history itself. The narrator's voice softened, becoming little more than a whisper. In the end, the Arctic became a symbol of balance, of endurance, of the fine line between discovery and destruction. For beneath this frozen ceiling lay humanity's greatest fear and its greatest achievement, the power to remain unseen. The modern submarine turned slowly, leaving the under-ice corridor and drifting back toward the open sea. Behind it, the ice closed again, silent, eternal, unbroken. And as the hum of the reactor faded into the cold, one quiet thought lingered in the deep. If the Arctic kept our secrets safe for half a century, what else might it still be hiding beneath its frozen skin? In the depths of the Cold War, silence was never truly silent. Even beneath miles of seawater, whispers moved, through static, through cables, through the hum of sonar and steel. This was the other war. The one fought not with bullets or bombs, but with listening. The world above spoke of peace, treaties, and balance, but below, the oceans pulsed with hidden conversations, a language of clicks, hums, and coded echoes, a war of patience, of deception, of listening first and being heard last. The narrator's voice drifts softly, as though echoing through the water itself. They called it undersea surveillance, but it was espionage, pure and quiet. Every submarine was an ear pressed against the floor of the ocean, every cable a vein carrying secrets across the globe. Somewhere in the dark, a modern submersible glides through the black. Its lights faint, its outline ghostly. The camera follows it as it passes over a seafloor littered with cables. Ancient, rusted, tangled lines of the Cold War's forgotten nervous system. The historian's voice continues. In the 1970s, the United States launched Operation Ivy Bells. It was one of the most audacious missions of the era, an underwater wiretap on the Soviet Navy itself. The music hums quietly, low, tense, like a heartbeat. The Americans had discovered that Soviet communication cables ran across the Sea of Okhotsk, carrying the most secure naval orders directly between bases. And so, deep beneath the surface, the submarine USS Halibut slipped quietly into those waters. Every move was calculated, every sound mattered. One wrong echo, and the Cold War could have turned hot. The sub in the scene lowers a mechanical claw, slow, deliberate, onto a dark cable half buried in sand. Tiny lights blink. A recording device, disguised, shielded, silent, is attached. No one above the surface would ever know. The device stayed there for months, the narrator explains, recording the unfiltered voice of an empire, orders, strategy, even the mundane chatter of officers unaware their words traveled through enemy ears. When the divers retrieved the device, they found hours, hundreds of hours, of classified Soviet transmissions. It was intelligence unlike any before. Pure, uncut, spoken truth. The historian's tone softens. But secrets don't stay buried forever. Years later, betrayal came. Not from the ocean, but from within. A single American spy sold the operation to the Soviets, and the next time the Halibut returned, the cable was gone. Cut clean. The ocean had gone silent once again. The water darkens around the submarine, as if the ocean itself is mourning the loss of a secret too powerful to keep. Silence stretches, long, heavy, alive. The narrator continues, slow and reflective. The sea remembers everything, every whisper, every betrayal. In those years, every sonar ping carried two meanings: what it said and what it chose not to. The voice lowers further, like a deep current pulling the listener inward. The Soviets had their own ears. Submarines patrolled beneath NATO waters, hunting sound itself. They built deep listening stations in the Barents and Baltic Seas, quiet sentinels waiting to catch the faintest echo of a foreign propeller. Above, the world saw nothing. Below, the world was a maze of shadows, each nation tracing invisible paths, guided by rumor and resonance. In the 1980s, American submarines carried covert divers to plant sensors near Murmansk. The Soviets countered by laying their own traps, and in between them, whales sang, ice cracked, and the deep grew crowded with invisible watchers. The scene shifts to a slow montage. Sonar screens, Morse code fragments, flickering green lights reflected on tired faces. Every face looks the same, calm, expressionless, listening. The historian's tone becomes almost hypnotic. Imagine living in a world of sound. No daylight, no windows, only the hum of machinery and the soft pulse of the ocean pressing against the hull. Every noise matters, because every noise could mean another submarine. Listening back. The silence deepens. A faint sonar ping drifts through the dark, one tone, then another, like the heartbeat of the sea. The narrator whispers, each ping was a question, each echo an answer. By the late Cold War, technology had turned the ocean into a chessboard of microphones. Satellites orbited above, mapping magnetic fields. Hydrophones below listened for footsteps of steel. No shot was fired, and yet the battle never stopped. The spy games beneath the waves, the historian says, weren't about victory. They were about knowledge. Who could see in the dark? Who could hear the other breathe? The camera moves closer to the seafloor, to the relics still resting there. A severed cable, a broken recording pod, a rusted Soviet sonar buoy, half buried in sand. All silent now. All witnesses to the decades when the world nearly ended, but didn't. The narrator concludes in a low, haunting murmur. When we look at the oceans today, we see only blue, but beneath that calm surface, history still hums. Faintly, endlessly. The sea remembers the voices that once passed through it. The secrets, the lies, the quiet war that shaped the modern world. The sub's lights fade as it drifts upward toward the surface. The final sound is the soft ripple of bubbles rising, the last breath of a secret escaping the deep. And then, silence. Beneath the surface of our world lies another, vast, dark, and almost untouched. For most of history, humanity looked up toward the stars. But by the late 20th century, a different kind of frontier began to call, not above, but below. The ocean's floor, once thought barren, lifeless, became the new edge of discovery and power. The same nations that raced into space turned their gaze inward, downward, into the abyss. The historian's voice settles like a slow current. It began quietly, not with rockets or parades, but with submersibles, small steel spheres designed to slip into the pressure-crushed depths no diver could survive. The world's navies, once obsessed with missiles, turned to the seabed, where new secrets, new minerals, and new military opportunities waited in silence. The scene fades to deep blue, the slow descent of light vanishing as the camera follows a submersible lowering itself through the dark. Tiny bubbles rise past portholes. Instruments glow faintly. Oxygen gauges, sonar pulses, heartbeats. By the 1960s, the narrator continues. Both America and the Soviet Union had begun exploring the deep ocean not as scientists, but as strategists. If missiles could hide beneath the sea, so too could listening posts, launch platforms, and even entire research bases. To understand the abyss was to control it. The soundscape thickens, a low mechanical hum, the rhythm of ballast pumps, the faint creak of pressure against steel. You can almost feel it, the voice says gently. The crushing force of the ocean, pressing from every side. At 1,000 meters, the hull begins to sing, a deep, groaning vibration that settles into your bones. The image shifts to black and white film reels of early bathyscaphs, Trieste, Alvin, Nautil. Their names sound almost mythic now, like old ships of legend. In 1960, the Trieste descended into the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point on Earth. Nearly 7 miles below the surface, Lieutenant Don Walsh and Jacques Picard saw something no human had seen before. A flatfish, alive, moving in the pitch dark, beneath pressures that could crush steel. They stayed only 20 minutes. Then they rose, slowly, through a silence so complete it felt infinite. The narrator pauses, as if sharing in that same silence. For years afterward, no one returned to that depth. The world above was too busy, with war, with politics, with progress. But the ocean remembered that descent. It waited. Soft orchestral strings hum like sonar pings, distant, ghostly. In the 1970s and 80s, the deep sea became more than a curiosity. It became a territory. The United States began mapping the ocean floor with military precision, searching not for fish, but for cables, wrecks, and signals. The Soviets did the same, their secret research vessels disguised as oceanographic ships, their true missions hidden in the quiet beneath. The scene drifts across underwater ridges, volcanic vents glowing red, clouds of mineral-rich smoke curling upward into the dark. Life, strange and alien, clings to the edges, white crabs, ghostly eels, blind shrimp. Scientists discovered hydrothermal vents, ecosystems that thrived without sunlight. Life, powered not by the sky, but by the earth itself. To them, it was a revelation. To militaries, it was a reminder. If life could survive down here, so could technology. The voice lowers, thoughtful. In time, submarines gave way to autonomous drones, unmanned explorers able to linger in the deep for months. They mapped canyons, charted wrecks, and scanned for lost submarines. But they also listened, for signals, for vibrations, for proof that someone else was listening too. A soft pulse echoes. 1, 2, 3, like a heartbeat through the abyss. The race for the abyss was never just about science. It was about presence. Who owned the silence? Who could hear the ocean breathe? Images shift to the late 20th century. American, Soviet, and later Chinese research vessels spreading across the Pacific. Flags waving against grey skies, sonar buoys dropping into blue water. The deep became a quiet battlefield of claims and counterclaims. Continental shelves extended by paperwork and satellite imagery. Nations began declaring their underwater borders, invisible lines drawn across a place no one had truly seen. The historian's tone softens, as if drifting into memory. Sometimes divers and engineers described a strange feeling, that the deep wasn't empty at all, that something vast was listening. Not a creature, but the ocean itself. The way the water carried sound for miles, bending and twisting it, as if whispering it back. A faint sonar ping hums again, then fades. The deeper they went, the more they realized how fragile everything was. Machines broke, cables snapped, pressure crushed metal like paper. But every failure taught them something new about survival, not of species, but of curiosity. Images of modern submersibles appear, sleek, quiet, alive with sensors. Remotely operated arms collecting samples from vents glowing like underwater stars. By the turn of the century, the narrator continues, the abyss had become the last unclaimed frontier on Earth. Companies dreamed of mining its riches. Cobalt, nickel, rare earths. Nations dreamed of military advantage, but some simply dreamed of knowing. A pause. Soft piano notes linger like drifting currents. In every era, humanity has looked for edges, the places where maps run out. The deep sea, perhaps more than space, reminds us how little we truly know. Each descent feels like a confession, an admission that for all our progress, there are still places untouched by ambition. The music fades, leaving only the sound of water pressure and the faint hiss of air. The abyss doesn't reveal itself easily. It requires patience, silence, respect, and sometimes the willingness to never fully return. The final image is of a single light flickering in total darkness, a small submersible suspended between nothing and everything. The narrator whispers, almost tenderly, "The race for the abyss never ended. It only grew quieter. For in the deep, silence is victory." The light fades completely. Only the hum of the ocean remains. The ocean, once measured in miles and fathoms, is now measured in data. Every wave, every current, every whisper beneath the surface, recorded, translated, analyzed. The seas that once hid empires now hold information. And information has become the truest power of all. The narrator's voice drifts like the tide, quiet and certain. In the age of wooden ships, the ocean separated nations. In the age of cables and code, it connects them. Across the seabed stretch hundreds of thousands of miles of fiber optic lines, a living web that carries nearly all the world's digital communication. A soft ambient hum underscores the scene, the faint pulse of electrical signals traveling through deep-sea cables, glowing faintly against the dark. If you've ever sent a message, streamed a film, or spoken across an ocean, the voice continues, your words likely passed through the silent deep, through a thread no thicker than a garden hose, lying beneath miles of crushing pressure. The camera moves slowly along a seafloor landscape, ridges, sand, coral, and then a line. A cable, stretching into infinity, blinking softly in the gloom. It began in the 19th century, the narrator explains, when the first telegraph cables linked continents, the first electric veins of a connected world. They were fragile, often breaking under the strain of tides or the bite of saltwater corrosion. But they changed everything. The world began to speak to itself. As the decades passed, copper wires gave way to glass fibers, each strand carrying billions of digital conversations in bursts of light. By the late 20th century, the same oceans that once divided empires became the hidden highways of globalization. The digital ocean, the narrator whispers, was never meant to be political. But it is. Every line that crosses a border, every node that connects nations, each one holds strategic power. The hum grows deeper, resonant, almost human. In the Cold War, submarines hunted for sound. Now they hunt for signal. Espionage has shifted from listening to conversations to listening to code. A faint sonar ping echoes, replaced by the quiet beeping of data pulses. The sound of the new ocean, binary, mechanical, alive. Modern navies map not only the shape of the sea, but its digital terrain. They trace every fiber, every junction, every repeat station where light is amplified and redirected, because whoever controls the cables controls the conversation. The camera pans to an underwater relay, a glowing cylinder humming gently in the dark. Tiny crabs crawl over it, unaware that the world's economies whisper through its core. The irony, the narrator notes softly, is that the world above the surface believes the internet lives in the sky. Satellites, clouds, wireless signals. But in truth, nearly all of it, more than 95%, lives here, beneath the sea. A pause, only the sound of the deep remains. Slow, rhythmic, steady. Each nation guards its section of the network. Cable maps are classified. Repair ships are escorted by naval patrols. Even maintenance has become a matter of sovereignty. The tone darkens slightly but remains calm, like a deep current shifting direction. In recent years, new players have entered this silent arena. Private companies, tech giants, and new superpowers laying their own digital paths across the deep. Some say the new empires are not built on land or sea, but on bandwidth. The music swells faintly, low strings, drifting like sonar waves. Underwater cables now stretch from Los Angeles to Tokyo, from Singapore to Marseille, from New York to Lagos. Some carry the traffic of billions. Others are secret, military-only conduits, built to survive sabotage or war. The narrator's voice slows, thoughtful. In the Second World War, ships fought for sea lanes. In the Cold War, submarines fought for secrecy. Now, nations fight for the invisible threads that bind the world together. Threads that can be cut with a single misstep or a single explosion in the dark. The sound of pressure deepens, a faint rumble like thunder miles below. Cyber warfare, data interception, undersea surveillance, all of it depends on a geography that no one sees. The ocean floor has become the foundation of the modern world. Images fade between glowing cable maps, data centers, and deep-sea maintenance drones drifting through silent trenches. Everything looks both futuristic and ancient, steel and coral, light and shadow. Even the ocean itself is becoming data. Every current mapped, every reef scanned, every tide predicted by algorithms and satellites. We now study the sea as if it were a machine, measurable, predictable, ours. A soft pause. Then the voice lowers, reflective. But it isn't ours. Not really. For all our cables and sensors, the ocean still keeps its secrets. We measure what we can, but not what we should. We track temperature, not history. We monitor sound, not memory. The hum of data fades, replaced by the slow pulse of waves. The ocean has always been the memory of the planet, a place where every storm, every war, every voyage leaves its trace. And now, in this digital age, we have woven our own memory into its depths. Our words, our lives, our world, all pulsing quietly beneath the waves. The tone becomes almost whisper-like, as if the ocean itself were speaking back. Someday, those cables will corrode, the data will fade, and future generations may wonder what stories once passed through the seabed, what dreams traveled in light across the silence of the deep. The narrator lingers on a final, haunting line. In the end, the ocean may not need us to remember. It already knows. Soft piano fades in, sparse, gentle notes. A last image of endless blue, the faint shimmer of cables like veins beneath translucent water. And then silence. Time, like the tide, always finds its way home. 80 years have passed since that quiet Sunday morning in December 1941, the day when peace shattered over the calm waters of Pearl Harbor. And yet, when you stand there now, as the sun drifts low over the Pacific, it feels as if the past still lingers. Just below the surface, the narrator's voice begins softly, as though carried by the wind across the harbor. Pearl Harbor today is quiet. The air smells faintly of salt and oil. The water glimmers with reflections, blue, silver, gold. Beneath that surface, the wrecks still rest. Silent, heavy, whole in memory, even if broken in form. You can almost hear the gentle lap of waves against the Arizona Memorial. Visitors speak in whispers. Some toss flowers into the water, watching them drift above the rusted hulls below. The USS Arizona remains there, the narrator says gently, its guns long silent, its decks sealed by time. Bubbles still rise from her hull, oil seeping slowly upward, one drop at a time. Locals call it the tears of the Arizona. Each bubble breaks at the surface and disappears into the air. A pause, long, soft, respectful. The men who served here are gone now, but their voices, in letters, diaries, old interviews, still echo faintly through the decades. They speak of duty, confusion, and the suddenness of it all, how the morning began like any other and ended as history. The sound of distant gulls fills the quiet, gentle, familiar, almost timeless. Standing here, you feel the weight of continuity. The ships are gone, the uniforms have changed, but the ocean remains, the same water, the same tides, moving endlessly between then and now. The narrator's voice lowers, almost as if speaking directly to you. If you close your eyes, you can still imagine it. The silhouettes of battleships lined in the harbor, the distant hum of aircraft engines before the first explosion, and beneath it all, the sound of the sea, steady, patient, unchanged. The image fades to the horizon, a faint line between blue sky and blue water. The ocean forgets nothing, the narrator continues softly. It carries fragments of every story, the wrecks of war, the cables of communication, the whispers of submarines. Beneath us lies not just the past, but the record of humanity's persistence. The music swells, slow strings, steady, reflective. When historians speak of Pearl Harbor, they speak of tragedy, of war, of awakening. But perhaps, at its heart, it is also a story about silence. What happens after the noise fades, after the ships sink, after the nations move on? The scene shifts. Archival footage dissolves into calm water. A child's reflection flickers where a sailor once stood. A modern submarine glides across the bay, silent, sleek, bearing no resemblance to those of the past. Imagine, the narrator says quietly, if one of those vessels, one from the future, had appeared that day. Its steel built for another century, its power beyond comprehension. Would it have changed history? Would it have stopped the war? Or would time have found another way? A pause. Only the sound of the waves remains. History is not made by machines, the voice continues. It is made by choices, by courage, by fear, by the quiet persistence of ordinary lives. The water ripples gently as a breeze moves across the harbour. Flowers drift, their petals separating one by one. In the end, every ship returns to the sea. Every empire returns to the earth, but the stories remain. They rise like bubbles from the deep, breaking gently at the surface, reminding us who we were. The narrator's tone softens to a whisper. The men of Pearl Harbor lived in a world without knowing what was to come. The nuclear age, the Cold War, the digital ocean beneath us today. They could not imagine the machines that now glide through the same waters they once sailed, but perhaps they would recognize the feeling, the vastness, the uncertainty, the awe of being small in a world so wide. A faint melody plays, one long, slow note that seems to echo across time itself. The tides of Pearl Harbor still move as they did in 1941. Each morning, light spills across the waves, touching both the living and the lost. Each evening, the shadows lengthen and the harbor sleeps again, holding its secrets as it always has. The camera drifts downward, below the surface, past the reflection of the sky, into the dark where the Arizona rests. A few fish glide through the beams of sunlight. The silence is deep, heavy, eternal. The narrator's final words come slowly, measured like the rhythm of the tide. History is never still. It moves, like water, between moments, between lives, between generations. And if we listen closely, we might hear it speaking. Not in thunder, but in the quiet hum beneath the waves. A final pause. The sound fades to the soft murmur of the sea, distant and endless. Thank you for journeying here, across time, across oceans, across memory. If these quiet reflections bring you calm, consider subscribing. There are many more nights and many more stories waiting beneath the surface. The music fades into stillness. Only the sea remains.